Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, you're perfectly audible.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Okay. I will be starting my speech in three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, in a democratic country where the government was created by the people, for the people, we should at least ensure that all these resources are targeted towards the people in need, towards the ones who need it the most. Before I start my speech today on this motion, a few things that I would like to define. And then I will be moving on to a few clarifications, and then I will be moving on to my arguments. So the first thing, the first phrase that I would like to define is the government scholarships. What do we mean by these? Scholarships, basically, they are funded by a governmental body, right? So this does not is not inclusive to private scholarships, which are funded by private bodies and the such, and are fully only funded by the government. And the second phrase is the local public universities, universities inside the country, local, that is funded and aided by the government. So the first thing we need to keep in mind is that these universities are would be significantly would have significantly cheaper fees because it's been subsidized by the government in the first place, and this is to aid the people of the middle and lower class in getting the education that they deserve, right? So what is our stance in what is our stance in this debate today? We, on the government side, want to create a world where these sponsor students, where one, these lower class and middle class students from these families get the chance that they deserve, and two, they will be able to give back to the government and the country. Now, we on the government side acknowledge and concede that this will not be an immediate change. Good change takes time, but we are confident that in the long run, this will have the more advantageous situation on our side. So our mechanism on the government side for today is that we would only offer these government scholarships to students who are already in these local public universities, right? The universities which admission fees are not based off of money. The students of lower and middle class families are those who have been accepted through these universities based on results and performance alone. And this is obviously not inclusive of private universities out and these scholarships are obviously not inclusive of private scholarships. So one thing to keep in mind that I would like to clarify, first of all, is these governmental scholarships in the first place, right? It was initiated by the government to aid the people and should be targeted to the people who are in need, the lower and middle class, who more than often, the only hope of these students of a successful career is through these opportunities alone. Their families literally cannot afford anything more than that. And so that they will have to work hard. And we believe that these students are the most deserving of these scholarships in the first place. Secondly, these scholarships are intended as somewhat something akin of a long run investment, right? The government is literally spending millions of ringgit on students with the hope that later on, after finishing their studies, they will come back to the country and work and give back and for the scholarships that the government has given. So basically, it's a long run investment on these nations' brightest minds, right? Moving on, I would like to impose a few burdens on the opposition side, right? We want you to prove to us that these even if we would want to include these private universities, right? Why would why would these privately funded students give long-lasting benefits for their countries in the event that they would choose to move out or work in another country? And they have to prove that giving government scholarships to private universities will lead to better outcomes for the country in the event that that is the case that you will be bringing up. So moving on to my argument, right? I will be giving one argument under the topic of we want to aid these low and middle class families to have a higher chance of obtaining the scholarships that they deserve. So more often than not, these low income students, so these students from these families have been told from a young age that they will have to work hard because their family literally cannot pay for it otherwise. And if they do not work hard, then they would have missed the chance of a bright future, right? So in these private universities case, the admission fees are just that, the admission fees. More often than not, normally there's not any other prerequisite requirements to get into these universities other than just having to pay a fee. We can safely assume that these well-off or rich parents that can actually afford to pay large amounts of money for these admissions is a privilege for those students in as it is, right? Now, we acknowledge that there are students who are smart, and we are not trying to tell you that these smart students in private universities are undeserving of any scholarships at all, right? But if they can afford that type of money in the first place, then their families can be sure to afford uh, any money that they need to further their studies as they progress in life, right? Now, we have to also acknowledge that it's not possible to get it without good grades. We agree, but that we believe that these students from the low-income families are the most deserving. And we believe that by implementing this motion, they will be having the higher chance of getting these scholarships in the first place, right? Now, imagine as a student from these middle and lower class families, you try to work your hardest throughout your whole life, and at the very last second, sure, you can have a POI.
Okay, so you said that your argument is basically that low and middle income families aren't able to afford uh, the admissions fees. That's why they deserve to get a scholarship. But there are also low and middle income family members that are in private uni. So, like, can you clarify on how does the government justify that giving scholarships to only those who are in public unis? Thank you.
Uh, I believe that that may be a case for a minority of the people. But as I've already said, the people who can already afford these private unis in the first place shouldn't be actually receiving this these government scholarships, right? Because the majority of these people who have been admitted into these local public universities are from the families that cannot really afford it in any way at all. Okay, so that's my answer for your POI. So now by not having that chance taken away from these lower class family students, uh, now that these people are out of the way, these students will now have a higher chance of obtaining these scholarships, and we believe that this is rightfully so because this is what the scholarships were initiated for in the first place, to help and aid these people for a chance that they otherwise would not be able to get. And with that, we are proud to propose. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now calling upon Leader of Opposition. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon to the Honourable Judge, punctual timekeeper, the side government, and members of the floor. The topic for us to debate today is this House would only offer government scholarships to local public universities. We, as the opposition team, strongly disagrees with the motion. Now, as the opposition team, we agree with the definition set by the first speaker. Here is how our team will structure today's debate. I, as leader opposition, will rebut several claims made by the Prime Minister and present two of my own arguments forward, while the Deputy Leader of Opposition will also will also rebut and present her own or two arguments. Now, our whip speaker will then rebut and further support our team's case. Now, before I start off my own arguments, I would like to rebut several claims made by the government. First of all, they mentioned that the scholarships are going to be given to are going to be given to lower and middle class families. What they failed to mention is that those lower and middle class families are only given towards the majority. The majority being that the scholarship is not gonna give it out to the minorities. Such as the Chinese, the Indians, they're not gonna receive those because of a certain policy made back in 1970, if I'm not mistaken. Now, hold on. Okay, scholarship system, it's based on a quota system. It's obviously gonna be received by the majority. The minority will not be given as much as it would be for the majority. Look at matriculation, for example. Only 10% of the only 10% of minorities are given a spot in the public colleges, as opposed to the majority given 90% of the quotas. Also being that hold on. Also given that the Prime Minister also fails to mention that they fail to acknowledge the quota system implemented by the government, which, as we know, is called the National Economic Policy. Also, so I would like to just summarize what I'm going to rebut here is that the government failed to acknowledge the lower and middle income families who are not of the majority. That concludes my speech for the rebut. Now,
PI.
now let's move on to my okay, yes.
If you say that the governments are only going to support the majority of people, then isn't that better than just focusing on the minority of people?
No, I disagree with that purely because the minorities are also Malaysian. Why are they not given equal what do you call it? Equal opportunities like the majorities? They also helped this country be where it is now. So why do you only want to focus on the majority? What about the minority? What if you were the minority? Would you like it if you were not given the opportunity to scholarship based on the fact that you are a minority? Thank you. That concludes. Now, second, let's move on to my own arguments against motion. First of all, local students will be missing out on quality educations overseas. Okay, the education system in Malaysia actually fails to provide basic skills such as reading, mathematics, and science to the average student, while also encouraging academic excellence in gifted
POI.
students. No, thank you. According to the OECD, cross-country service of primary and secondary school. The students based on primary and secondary school in Malaysia, the students' basic skill scores are about extremely low, lower than the majority of nations. Now let's bring to the United States. Look at the United States. Okay, the United States has over about more than 4,000 colleges and universities. The best universities are there. Look no further than Harvard, University of Berkeley, MIT. You know the drill. The US higher education system is much more effective than any other national system at concentrating their own resources, which concerning especially top students, money, grants, and has the best faculty in a small number of university. And their top universities, their scholarships are open to almost everyone outside of the country and inside the country. They're giving opportunities to everyone from different kinds of nations, third world nations, second developing nations. Like in Malaysia, for example, several Malaysians actually won a spot for Harvard universities. Okay, and that concludes my first point. Moving on to my second point, being is that this motion does not include private universities in the government definition. And they themselves says the government scholarship won't include private universities. Now there are more than about 500 private universities and colleges in Malaysia for students to choose from for their tertiary studies, and so many of them are on par with other public universities. Bear in mind, some students who don't get to enter public universities are brilliant students who are extremely brilliant. Why do they not get to enter? Well, like I've said before, it's called the quota system. They're brilliant, but they do not get to enter because the quota has been filled, and they are left to pick at the only option, which is private universities. Okay. On the other hand, private universities can be actually quite a lot less competitive, and which is as long as you meet the necessary requirements for your desired course, your place is almost certainly secure. Not only do they get to enter the course they desire, they also get to not only do they get to enter the course that they desire, they do not have to compete on the level that other public universities have to compete to enter, which is funny considering public universities usually are more sided on the majority. And thus, as the opposition, I strongly disagree with the motion, and that would conclude my speech. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now calling upon Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Right. Ladies and gentlemen of the floor, we come to you as the government team here to propose a proposition or a principle that we would like to only offer government scholarships to local public universities. Now, what do we mean when we say this? Our first speaker has already said that we are only offering our scholarships, the country scholarships, the taxpayers' money scholarships to public universities, to the students who study in public universities that will help in the long run better the country. Now, as our first speaker stated, we give to the opposition team that as although this such strategy will not immediately benefit the country, in the long run, in trying to build a better nation, it will extremely accelerate the economic structure as well as the infrastructure of a nation, as well as the quality of people in a nation. Nations are not built in a day. Now, I'm going to talk about how implementing such a policy will save millions of dollars or millions of funds for a country. Before I move on, though, I would like to rebut a few points given by the opposition team. Now, firstly, they talked about how scholarships are not given out to minorities like the Chinese and Indians, so on and so forth, and how they even answered that we should try and support the minorities of a country rather than support the majority. Well, two things to this. First of all, their issue, their whole stance on this debate, ladies and gentlemen on the floor and judges, is that they are trying to talk about just Malaysia. We as the government team are trying to talk about a world, a nation, where let's forego those quota systems. Let's think about a nation. What is the best solution for a nation to provide better educations for its children or better educations for its future? Well, first of all, is going to be trying to support students who only get into government universities and not into highly politicized and highly crowd-funded private universities that solely depend on how much money you have. Now, secondly, when they talked about how students in Malaysia scores extremely low in the whole world, yes, we give to the opposition team that yes, there are students in Malaysia. Our standard of education is not as on par as say US, the UK, so on and so forth. But by encouraging more students to study, by giving them more scholarships in a public university setting, we are increasing the quality of students in the long run for our country, which in turn slowly but surely increases that score. So in our world, we have a better world. Now, for example, let's take the worst case scenario as well as the worst case for our side. So for example, when they want to allow funding for all universities, what happens? Let's say best case for them, students, 2 students get the best scholarships, they go to Harvard, they go to Cambridge, they go to Oxford, they excel there. What happens then? Where is the sustainability for a country to provide millions and millions of ringgit, for example, in the context of Malaysia, and these students going there becoming successful, but where's the drawback? Where is the benefit for a country after spending millions on that star student? Now, in our worst case scenario, where we lose some minorities, where we lose some students, in the end, what ends up happening is we have better outreach to the majority and most of the students that are in our country, which in turn the average student in Malaysia, for example, gets a better education. Now, how this supports my point on how it saves money is firstly, when governments are not spending average around 50 to 70 to 60,000 ringgit in Malaysia on private tuition fees or private university fees, that money can be redistributed, reimbursed back to government scholarships for government universities that cost around maybe at most 40,000. And what this happens is it spreads the money around, it spreads the funding around to be able to be given to more people. When more people are given such funding, they are able and are allowed choices to go on to better lives. Now, why is this good for our world? Well, first of all, when more money is being recycled back into a country's economy through our own system, firstly, we get to improve our standard of education. We have better facilities, we can improve on such facilities, and in the cases of which the opposition team said our scores are very low, we can start to improve such scores. Now, why is that also good? Is because the quality of people in the nation that provides for the nation as well as its image and economy increases drastically over time, which is the most sustainable ideal for a growing nation like Malaysia. Now, why is this important? Is because, first of all, we don't want to neglect our country. If we want to go with the opposition side and support these star students, what ends up happening is they will go on, and there's no guarantee the opposition can give us that is concrete enough to say that these students will definitely come back and try to repay the debt given that the country gave them the opportunity to go further. There's no guarantee that they will come back. So our side here gives a broader spectrum for more quality among the whole of society, as well as encouraging growth systematically among all races. When we talk about minorities and majorities here, we're including everyone. Just for the purpose of the debate, we're taking Malaysia. But let's say we go for our best case, ladies and gentlemen. We take countries all across the world. Let's take a nation, for example. What is the best way? Forgo the quota systems, forgo the discrimination in our country. Take a nation. Take a nation and see what is the best way for a nation to grow, what is the best way for a society's nation to grow. Well, firstly, it's by supporting its own students through sustainable goals. How is that? Supporting them through their own universities, supporting them in their futures. And that is where our side of the government wins this debate, because we support our own people from lower backgrounds, from lower income economies, to try and strive for better futures for themselves, which in turn creates a better future for our nation. Now, we tackle the opposition team on another front by also clarifying that private universities are still there. We just don't support private universities, because what ends up happening is the government fund, the hard-earned taxpayer money, goes to the private universities and never comes recycled back to the country, which in turn hinders development of a country. Now, this is where we as the government team look at the situation and see that for a stronger, more sustainable society, for a more sustainable nation in the long run, which is going to be able to show itself in the long run, our side wins, because even though it's not a flashy proposal, it is a more concrete proposal that has very few flaws and is a more stable one that we can support. We are proud to propose this motion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that speech. Now calling upon Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Before I start, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, thank you. An investment in education pays the best interest. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'll structure my speech first by giving rebuttals towards the opposition and then starting with my own arguments. Now, I would like to start my rebuttals against the Prime Minister. Now, the Prime Minister in his world did not actually mention a proper and whole mechanism, which I find it funny. For today's debate, I would like the government side to clarify whether the scholarships that the government are offering is merit or income based, and the government itself has not clarified this. And then not only that, but Prime Minister has also said that the government scholarship is by the people for the people. Now, I think that this is a very cherry picking statement, because the government has said that they will only give government scholarships to those who attend government public universities, and yet they parade around and tell us that their scholarships is by the people for the people. Now, I would like to put the question to the government side: are the students studying in private universities not the people of the countries, not the citizens of the countries? Don't they deserve the same amount of education and privileges as those who are in public universities? Not only that, but the government side has also said that these scholarships will be targeted to people in need and lower and middle class students. Now, the government have failed to recognize that those who are in public universities not only come from one background, but they also come from multiple backgrounds. They can be from a higher middle class, upper middle class, and yet they choose to study in a public university, just as like the government said, because of the subsidized fees. And now the government pushed to us the burden. Why should we allow private university students, why should we give them why should we give them government scholarships? And the government also said, why would private university students not move out the country once they have received their government scholarship? Now there is the question there. Yes, we have no guarantee that they will move out of the country. Even if they move out of the country, how can the government itself guarantee that those who come from public universities do not move out of the country too? They also do not have a guarantee, and we also do not have a guarantee. I think this is a very double-edged sword for the government to bring up in their first argument. Not only that, but the deputy prime minister said that with the rebuttals about the minorities, and they have said in their argument that why are we talking only about the minorities when we should have looking at the majorities? And why are we just talking about Malaysia when we are talking about the world? Well, the government also fails to acknowledge that they did not set up to this debate in Malaysia or in the world. So we choose as opposition to set up the debate in Malaysia. And then the deputy prime minister also said that they do not want to focus on students who are in private universities, because students in private universities often come from an upper middle class background and they solely depend on money. But the government does not fail to recognize that those who are in private universities also come from lower income families. Now, I would like to finish my rebuttals, because I'll be starting my argument that is closely related to my rebuttals, which is not every single person in the world have the same education backgrounds, receive the same education privileges. There are people who are in rural areas who does not have access to the internet, who does not go to school. There are underprivileged children in every nation of the world, if you are going to talk about the world in the government state, that do not receive quality education. As we know, public universities are scarce. There is a low number of public universities. Entering these public universities is very hard, especially if there is already a quota. Let's not talk about the quota about the race, but let's also talk about the quota of income. Let's also talk about the quota of gender, because there is such things. No, let me finish my point first. Because these things exist in almost every nation. We're having quotas. It will not only hinder students who come from underprivileged backgrounds to enter the unis, because they will have to enter the unis through merits by getting good grades. As the government has pointed out, if you come from an underprivileged background, how would you be able to score well? How would you be able to get merits? Yes, there are many students who are in public universities that come from a lower income family, that come from a middle class families. But more than often, most of them come from upper middle class families, where they are able to afford quality education, where they are able to afford to have private tutors, because they enter public universities by merit. In the world that we have today, ladies and gentlemen, the government has not told us whether the scholarships will be given based on merit base or based on income. Breaking down their vote is very easy, because they have not structured it well. They have not taken into accountability, and they are simply cherry picking situations that help with their arguments. They are not looking at the intersectionality. So in my argument today, limited public universities cause limited spots. Like we know is in Malaysia, for example, the UPU system is very random, and not everyone gets to enter public universities. And those who do not come from a good education background cannot compete to enter public universities. And this will cause them, those who come from middle income backgrounds, to take out education loans such as PTPTN. They go through suffering so they can enter universities in private universities. So entering private universities is not only about financial. We also take account as opposition on how they came towards the private university. Maybe they are just in private universities because they are taking out a loan. Yes, the government itself pointed out that there are many bright students in private universities, and they are unable to enter government universities because of such things, such as quota, such as the randomness of our university system. So this will lead to to a decrease in our talent pool. The government in the long run said that this is sustainable because people will keep on coming back, but they have not given us a guarantee that students from public universities will also be coming back to us the country and serving the countries after they have finished using their scholarships, which is why today I'm proud to be against this motion, which is this house will only offer government scholarships to local public universities, because every single universities have something to offer. But limiting it, we will only create an unsustainable country. We will only decline our talent pool. It will not be beneficial to us, our country. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now calling upon Government Whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
All right, so I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, on the government side, what we have to prove in today's debate is that we are gonna, is our aim in this debate is that we prefer the world where people give back or contribute to the countries after they finish their studies. So that is why we implement our motion today. And on the opposition side, we have given them the burden to prove that that this student will lead to better outcomes of the country, and they can actually help more people and save more poor people rather than our government side. So let's move on to the first clash that are happening in this debate: whether we should help the majority of people in the public universities, or we should help the minorities of the people in the private universities. Ladies and gentlemen, we should note that the first thing first, that is, in private universities, the costs are way higher than in public universities. There is even a possibility that if we sponsor one private university students, that we can actually use that money from sponsoring all those one private university students to 5 public university students, just because of the difference in the submission fee. So, ladies and gentlemen, note that like I said just now in my clash, the majority of people who are vulnerable, the people who are from middle and lower class, middle and poor class, are in public universities rather than just a minority in private universities. This is because to get in the private universities first, you have to have a lot of money, and that's why usually only rich people go to the private universities. And even if there is a middle class people that goes to private universities, there will be only little of them, because most of middle class and poor people go to public universities. So, ladies and gentlemen, if by giving the government scholarship on the students in public universities, we could actually help more vulnerable people in the end, because we could actually less the burden of more people, of more poor people, of more middle class people, rather than just helping those little people in the private universities. Second of all, more people in the end can improve their social economic status, because they have higher and better chance at getting jobs, because they are being sponsored by the government scholarship, so that they can access to better education, and in the end they will provide more to the countries, as being said by my deputy prime minister. So, ladies and gentlemen, even if in the best case scenarios, that the arguments that are being brought by the opposition side is true, that there's minority of people who choose to study in universities, and this minority of people are from the poor and middle and are from the poor and middle class background, this argument still falls down, because in the end we would actually benefit more poor and middle class people, because of the quota, as being said by the opposition themselves, in the public universities. Second of all, the second clash that are happening in this debate is whether or not the local student are missing is the local student missing out on the better education in overseas universities, or in private universities, or whether we should focus on improving the local education in local universities. Ladies and gentlemen, like has been said just now by my Prime Minister, we sponsor students who are already in the public universities. So these students are actually choosing to study in public universities. So there's no issue of being missing out or not having the same education as the students from from private universities or from overseas. That is why we sponsor them in the first place, because we believe that they are more vulnerable. That they are more vulnerable and they are more deserving because they choose to study in the local university, and in the end we believe that they could contribute to our country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even in their best case scenario, even if these local students are missing out on all of the privileges that will be given in the overseas universities or private universities, ladies and gentlemen, even if that is the case, we should note that there are still people who are studying in local universities, and I believe that that if we sponsor more students who are in public universities rather than other universities, this in the end, all of the money sponsored by that university will come back to the government instead of staying in that private organization. And in the end, our government can actually use the money to improve local education, and in the end give more education to poor people and middle class people who cannot access to this education, as being said by the opposition themselves. So when we improve our education, more people would benefit from this education rather than just having this education being benefited by the people from rich class or people from who did not attend public universities. And the last clash is about about whether or not we can guarantee that the student who studies in local and public universities will contribute back to our country. So first of all, you need to know that they are funded by government scholarship. So they know that they are in some ways owe to them this privilege of having scholarship in the first place. So that is why they will actually in the end contribute to the government, because they know that the government helps them in some way. And second of all, if they study in the local public university in the first place, they should know that it's easier to get jobs they should know that it's easier to get jobs inside of the country rather than outside of the country, because of the education background that they have that is in the public local universities. So with that being said, all of the arguments from the opposition side today, which is about not including the minorities of people who are in private schools to get to get scholarship, about people having different social background, and how about quota and about random UPU system, even if they manage to prove that point in the first place. That is why we as the government side still win this debate, because of more benefits that we manage to brought to this country in the first place. So with that, I rest my case. Proud to propose.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now calling upon opposition whip. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, I'm starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A very good evening to the honorable adjudicator and the precise and acute timekeeper and fellow members of the floor. The first speaker of my opposition side has given the definition as well as the first point of our stance, and the deputy minister has given her second and third point, as well as rectify any further claims with her rebuttals from towards the honorable Prime Minister of the government side. And today I will be summarizing my team's case, as well as presenting rebuttals towards the honorable Prime Minister, as well as the Deputy Minister, as well as the Whip. So starting off with the Prime Minister's rebuttals, so he's gone on and on about getting these public university students government-funded scholarships would guarantee a very clean cash flow. But again, as my deputy minister has mentioned in her argument and in her rebuttal that just because they're public university students and just because they are excellent students doesn't necessarily make them exempt from um, having the opportunity to work for some kind of non-government funded organization or overseas in general. So that means in the end, the government would just lose more money than they bargained for. And moving on, a chance given to simply just the public universities shouldn't just be given to one side, because what you take from one side would eventually suffer from it, because we're essentially taking away from the delicate balance that's already been established between these two universities. Why should we take away something that's already been given for both institutions and instead focus on one? Because the benefits, from what I can see, even after the honorable ministers have clarified, have not shown much benefits in general. And again, to move to further press a point, no, thank you. Not all middle and lower class families can go to public universities. Not all of them go there, because some of them do indeed go to private universities, as we've mentioned multiple times throughout this debate. And in which case, because there are certain government funded scholarships that are income based. So what we are essentially doing is taking away that one privilege that they already had in the beginning, and we've essentially cut away all hope for them to even try and get out of their situation. So are you willing to take away that chance from them instead, just to get a
Yeah,
potential prosperous country? No, thank you. So moving on to the Deputy Prime Minister's rebuttals. So he's mentioned on about like a stable economy with the implementation of this motion, right? And as I've said, what you take away from one group, you to improve the other, they will suffer for the consequences of it. You're only increasing the quality of students in one group when you forget to realize, like the Deputy Minister has mentioned, the number of private universities outweigh the number of public universities. So technically speaking, wouldn't it be more beneficial for the government to just move their attention towards the private universities instead, because they have more students, they have more stability, technically speaking? And moving on to the whip's rebuttals. Yes.
If we sponsor to these private university students, don't you think that the people in public universities will have less chance to get the scholarship?
Okay, so firstly, I don't know why you would think it would diminish their chance to get a scholarship in the first place, because again, a chance should be given equally, even disregarding all the backgrounds and everything. But in the end, it's all about quotas. So in the end, it's all about quotas, because we still have the fact that we're fighting with quotas with every single race in Malaysia, except for maybe our own. But the point is, they don't suffer from any demerits from just for sharing the opportunity with other private university students as well. I don't see the point why they would suffer from it in the first place. So again, moving on to the whip's rebuttals. So they pushed this narrative, and again, the whip has used this narrative again to rectify their points about how a private university's egregious funds tend to symbolize that more rich people tend to go to private universities, and they neglect the fact that other people also attend universities, those universities too, because they don't have the opportunities available for such as the public universities. Perhaps their grades are not as good. Perhaps their opportunities were cut short because they didn't have any spaces. But the point I'm trying, yes.
What is the actual demographic economically of private university? Isn't it mostly comprising of rich individuals, and the minority are the poor ones?
So I can't give an exact number, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what? So you're disregarding this group of. They're not necessarily minorities because they're still a group that we should prioritize. Am I right? Because they're still they're students that were denied of the opportunity of going to public universities or public institutions in the first place. So we shouldn't take away that chance from them. And again, so to summarize this one point, the debate for the government has gone on and on about how their unis have been are the defining factor for a student, when in actuality the defining factor for a student is their own individual merit, in their own individual abilities. So why should we be focusing on what uni they come from instead of what they're capable of individually? So why should we limit ourselves to that narrative? So that's all the time that's given to me. I will rest my case here. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech. Now calling upon opposition reply. Here.
Am I audible? Can you
Yes,
guys
you are.
hear? Okay, thank you. Quality, not quantity, ladies and gentlemen. Today's motion I wholeheartedly disagree with. The government has not shown a clear picture why public uni should be the only ones has not shown a clear picture why public uni students university students should be the only one receiving scholarships. Now, the government itself has built a model world today where they are only going to be giving scholarships to those who come from public universities, and yet they have not yet clarified whether those scholarships are going to be merit based, whether they are going to be income based. Not only that, they keep spitting and talking in circles about how money that they will invest in their public university students will come back to the government, and they have not said yet what is the process. By simply giving money to students, and the opposition itself has already said that they have no guarantee that public university students will come back to the country, they have contradicted themselves. How is the money going to come back to them? When you invest into public university students, you have not given us a clear pathway on how that money will come back to the government itself. And then not only that, the opposition has also brought up a new argument, which is those who come from public universities will be able to will be easy for them to get jobs, which is not relevant in today's debate, because in today's debate we are talking about scholarships for students who need it in order for them to study at universities. And the government today has been cherry picking favoritism for their own cherry picking situations that favoritize their arguments. They are not looking at their citizens as a whole. They are not looking at nations as a whole. They are not thinking about intersectionality. And then not only that, but the government's argument today is that they want to give scholarships to public universities because public universities are targeted to people who are lower and middle class students. In my rebuttals, I've already said not everyone who goes to public universities are from lower and middle income students. And this is where in today's debate, the opposition team has already won, because we have considered that not those who go to public universities are from the same background. And those who come from public universities are more than often those who have privileged education backgrounds. That's why they are able to enter public universities, which have a limited space, which has a limited quota. That's why they are able to go into public universities, because it is often a merit-based system. And not only that, but the deputy prime minister has also talked about why are we just talking about minorities when we should be looking at the majorities of the citizens in our countries. And that we see today as today's government is exceptionally cruel towards their own citizens. They are not thinking about those who are in private universities, those who have talents beyond imaginations, because they are unable to enter public universities. Hence, they do not get the right, they do not get the privilege to get a scholarship. They do not have the same opportunities as those who come in from public universities, just because they do not fit the mold that the government has put up for us today. And that is where side opposition wins today's debate, because we are considering everyone from every single background. We are not cherry picking situations just to win our own just to back up our own arguments. We are talking about everyone as citizens, as nations. We are not talking about Malaysia only, but we are talking about Americas, and we are talking about those who are in Europe. People in different nations have different quotas, and they have different restrictions to getting into public universities, not only because of merit base, but because of their unequal education background. And this is why I think that the opposition today has actually won the debate, because the government has not give us a strong reason why scholarships should only be privileged for those who goes to public universities. With that, I rest my case.
All right, thank you for that speech. And now calling upon the last speaker of the House, government reply. Hear.
Am I audible? Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the reply speech. Let's all take a step back and view the whole debate as has been discussed, right? As the reply speech, I will be reviewing some clashes that were apparent in this debate, and also debunking some inaccurate claims from side opposition, as we've already stated before from our arguments, right? So basically, the burdens we imposed on opposition side was that, firstly, how are you sure that these private students will be able to give back to the country? And secondly, even if we were to give these scholarships to these private students, how is it that it has better outcomes for the country as a whole? They did not really manage to clarify both of these burdens, and I will get to that in a bit, right? So what did we tell you today? Our stance was that we wanted these lower income students to get a better chance, a higher chance of getting these scholarships in the first place. And secondly, that we are sure that these public students will be able to give back to the country as much as they should. The first core part of the debate that opposition has failed to recognize was that we are talking about government scholarships. There are still a bunch of private scholarships available to these rich students if need be, and I will get back to that later. So my first point was, I told you how these low-income students will be able to get more chance because of the fact that they are more deserving, being the cruel victims of this world of societal classes. Opposition side brought up to us about talking about individual merit, but we have to concede that some people already have a privilege that others do not. Even if we are talking about individual merit here, if these rich kids have talent, then they already can afford these scholarships in the first place, which is why we want to prioritize these people from these lower classes, right? They also talked about unequal chances because these students somehow cannot enter these public universities but can enter private universities using the PTPT. And firstly, we've already told you that it's significantly easier to enter public universities, but the very fact that public universities were created exactly for these people, the vast majority of the people that, one, may not have a high income, or two, even if they don't get the best results that they can, they will be distributed around to other local public universities that are scattered around Malaysia. They also told us about not enough quota, not enough spaces, but we've already told you that in the long run, when this motion is implemented, we believe that it'll be more beneficial to the country, and with these fundings that we can improve the general quality of local public universities, which will result in more spaces for these public universities and more funding and more quotas for these people in the first place. So that argument is redundant. We believe that in the long run, our world still wins the case. My second speaker also told you about saving money, because less money used on these public universities, alone from the fact that these private universities are much more expensive in the first place, now more money is going to be cycled into the economy and is going to be repaid back to the country, back to the people, right? We are supporting these students with a sustainable goal using our own local abilities. We've already told you this, right? So the first clash that we found out was, do we want to cater to the majority or the minority of people? Firstly, we've already told you that private universities obviously cost higher. So we don't understand how is it that majority of the people will be in the private universities in the first place. But one, even if they are there in the first place, that it means that they can afford, right? Because of the fact that these private universities cost more, we believe that it is a much more significantly efficient investment to invest in these public universities in the first place, because now more people have a chance with more money circulating around, less money used, right? With this money, we can use it to improve the general quality of education in our local public universities, and because of this, more money can come back to them. The last clash that I found out is the guarantee, right? We've already told you how these students, knowing that the government helped them, will come back. And with the fact that the general quality will be improved in the future, this will incentivize these people to come back and work for the country and help develop the country into a more prosperous nation. And with that, we believe that side government gives more benefit to the country in the long run. With that, I rest my case. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that speech, and that marks the end of this debate. I'd like to thank all debaters for the debate. So just give me 10 to 15 minutes, and I will prepare the verdict and the oral adjudication. Thank you.